Welcome to the Book of Urm, Tales of Piecora, the Haunted Fortress. Chapter 15. Orchid. Orchid. For several days after the launch of the sovereignty, Ravziz lay in the large bed and never left the room. Food and drink were brought to her in the mornings and evenings as she slowly recovered from her seizure, drifting in and out of troubled sleep. Otto stayed with her except when Piecora took him with her on some project or adventure, and Ravzizi was glad for that. She now trusted Piecora more than anyone she had ever known in her life, and she knew that Otto was not only safe with the Xianjian guide, but that he was learning things that Ravzizi could never teach him. Ravzizi found it hard to find words that could express how thankful she was for Piecora coming into both their lives. She stared out the window during the day at the distant scenery drifting by. Her room was on the port side of the ship, so the window faced north as the ship sailed gently eastward over the rolling hills below. The gigantic ship floated mostly on air, swaying and weaving gently this way and that as the sails harnessed the winds and the wheel aimed the ship's large twin rudders on their course. Ravzizi still felt a constant, subtle vibration all around her, as if the ship were humming softly to itself, as a mother would nurture its precious living cargo. When she asked about the vibrations, Piecora explained that it was the massive vertical keel beneath the ship, and that its sharp, bladed edge was always barely in contact with the ground, tilling it like a farm tool and leaving a thin, narrow path in the ship's wake. Muthan, Brenzage, and Heliclesian technologies combined to lift the ship off the ground, but the keel holds us steady, Piecora said to her one night, while they were lying in bed together alone. She used Ravzizi's bare arms and hands to puppet the shape and movement of the ship. More sails are required than that of the sea, Piecora continued softly. 3 main masts that stand vertically along the ship's central axis, here, here, and here, she said, touching Ravzizi's arm at 3 different points, and 6 ancillary canvas wings on either side, fanning her fingers out on either side of Ravzizi's arm, and 1 that hangs below the prow to help with steering and stability, making the total canvas allotment to be 16 sails that gather the winds and ride the sky. Once we've lifted and the blade is released from the ground, the sails take over. They drive us while the rudders steer us. The tip of the blade never leaves the ground, so we fly along according to the elevation of the land beneath us. It's not really flying, if you ask for my opinion, more like floating at a great height. I don't understand any of it, but this is how Ogiom explained it to me. I don't think he understands it either, though. He says he's just sailing her as if we were on open water. That means he's trusting you more than you might give him credit for, said Ravzizi, pulling her arm down and resting it across Piecora's chest. She nuzzled her face into Piecora's black hair and spoke softly into her ear. Only you know the wildlands, and the sea is nothing like it. He'll have no idea what to do when something unpredictable happens, and will need to lean on you heavily once we leave Canonia. He already is, said Piecora, rolling her eyes as she stared out the window nervously at the waning crescent red moon. After the first day since the launch, the sovereignty had cleared the valley between the rising eastern vestiges of Erith Amron and the thick evergreen forest of Dari Abran to the southeast, and by morning they were on the other side, skirting along the northern tree line of Dari Abran to the south. Out her window facing north, she could see beautiful fields of tall grass, sage and wheat, sparsely dotted with small groves of deciduous and coniferous trees that tapered off and gave way to a large, swaying golden sea of tall grasses further beyond to the north. If her knowledge of Canonian geography was correct, she guessed that this distant grassland was called the Lawns of Artemis, as the people of the city of Durinlad further north claimed that the prairie consisted of the golden hair of their goddess, Artemis, or Dur, splayed out across the lands south of their city as she lays down to sleep. Such whimsical people the Durinladans must be. Ravsez thought to herself as an icy breeze swept across her face, cooling it from the warm sun. At night, she lay propped up in the bed, still watching the passing landscape beneath the waning red moon, and the stars above as she drifted in and out of a restless sleep. She never slept for more than 3 hours, always waking herself from some inescapable night terror. During that first difficult day of the launch, Vula came and visited. She sat on the bed next to Ravsese and talked more about her life as a gladiator in the Canonian Games, and though her conversation was a welcome distraction from Ravsese's inner turmoil, it made Ravsese ever more grateful that Autor had escaped the same fate. On the second day, early in the morning, a small, strange woman entered the room. She was shorter and slighter than Ravsese, with long, light brown hair the colour of muddy clay, caked with earthy clumps of lichen, moss and mould, and little twigs stuck out in all directions, each one featuring a single flower of various colours and petals. Her long, shabby robe appeared to have been dragged through a swamp, so stained and weathered it was. She left small, muddy, bare footprints behind her as she walked. Her pale skin had a light greenish tinge, and her small eyes were set wide apart on a mousy face, always looking from side to side, twitching erratically. Her sunken eyes were light amber with a yellow inner light surrounded by dark circles, making Ravsez wonder if this odd little woman suffered from sleep deprivation even worse than Ravsez did. Nevertheless, despite her unusual appearance and apparent carefree approach to her own hygiene, the small woman had a soft-spoken, gentle and benevolent demeanour. As the little woman entered the room, a thick, humid musk filled the air that reminded Ravsez of an early morning downpour that elicits a thick, rising mist before a hot summer day. It wasn't at all unpleasant, but it seemed strange that a person could exude such a poignantly natural and specific presence. No perfume she ever encountered could produce such an effect so broadly and physically. The memories came unbidden to Ravsez, an unexpected range of thoughts from her past life in Muth. Muthans, for the most part, did not follow gods or spirits or deities. Rather, the Muthan people revered the elements as they are, powerful forces of nature that are docile at times, ferocious at others, sometimes hurtful, other times harmful, but never with any motives that might be ascribed to them. They felt no need to personify the elemental forces of nature, requiring them to be revered or worshipped, for Muthans considered such forces as the wind, rain and the sun as worthy of their reverence for what they naturally were. It's a rather stoic and mundane view of faith, some might say, yet the Muthans shunned any worship or association or acknowledgement of anything beyond this world, the primal realm, the world they could understand, quantify and feel with their own hands after the cataclysm. Instead, Muthans found their faith in the natural forces of the world, without any need for the supernatural. As they said, the world is strange and powerful enough, worthy of our curiosity, ambition and deference. Naturally, most Muthans tended to be naturally born skeptics when it came to concepts of the supernatural. Certainly there were exceptions to this, like in all things. Some in Muthan society, who were especially superstitious and held such notions as spirits, attributing personified aspects to the sun, the moons, the winds and rains, the fields and the harvest, mountains and rivers and forests, and all other natural wonders of the world, but only a minority who were not taken seriously. The Unskavia obviously held a special place in Muthan society in this respect, like in all others, for there was no denying their heritage. Though it was difficult to pin down exactly how Muthans felt about this, as it differed from person to person. For the most part, Muthans pitied the Unskavia as a symptom and consequence of the unfortunate actions of their ancestors, and they left it at that. Throughout history there were occasional movements of propaganda to separate the Unskavia from their infernal origins, but the Unskavia themselves always denounced these movements, unifying beneath a proud coalition of acceptance as self-identified devilkin, refusing to ever forget or ignore who and what they were. Their pride of identity was the one thing that they could claim as their own and never have it taken from them, even if to assuage the shame of their oppressors. Not being superstitious herself, Ravsez wondered who or what this person might be that entered her room as she watched the strange little woman shuffle across the room toward her wordlessly, filling the room with such a palpable scent of damp earth. She just didn't seem real to Ravsese, or convincing in her human guise. Ravsese also wondered if she might be hallucinating, maybe a lingering effect from her seizure. The little woman came to the edge of the bed, bowed, then took Ravses's hand and held her wrist, saying, "May winds ease your worries, child, and rains cleanse your mind." Ravsez was wearily surprised at the woman's greeting, as it was very similar to how Muthans might greet each other, though she'd never heard the exact phrase before. The woman ran her slender fingernail up and down Ravses's wrist and forearm, and she felt herself becoming very relaxed. Gradually her fears and troubles drained from her mind, leaving her numb and feeling strangely vacant. Absently, she tilted her head to face the strange woman and uttered without thinking, "What are you?" "Orchid Rosmania, my love," said the woman, and kissed the back of Ravses's hand. She had a high, creaky voice. Her hands and lips were cold, damp and smooth, like a wet ceramic doll. "That is my Canonian name. You may also call me Morganthaw, my precious Unscavian." Ravsez felt like she was liquefying into a giant sponge, and she could barely keep her eyes open. "You are not real," she muttered sleepily. "Oh, I'm real enough," said Orchid kindly. "Just ask my summoner from so many of your generations ago. May her soul find rest. She was kind enough to leave me this body to inhabit, and since she died right there within the circle, I entered this world a free spirit, untethered by any oaths or commands. A new beginning for me, a premature end for her. Too young she was, poor girl. 'Twas too much for her, the summoning, that is, but convenient for me, wasn't it?" "You are a spirit?" "Well, to you, yes, if you are open-minded. And the Sienjans here, I think they know me as well. But to the rest of these blokes stuck in the mundane, I'm just the ship's healer, just a crazy little druid with her weeds and ointments, dragging in the mud everywhere she goes. But they put up with me, as I ease their woes, and make things better for them, generally speaking." "What are you doing to me?" whispered Ravsez slowly with her eyes half closed. "Easing your many woes, my child," said Orchid. "That is the calling I have chosen for myself. It's funny, I entered this world and became instantly free, and yet I choose an existence of servitude. I yearn to help others without contract or obligation. I do it freely." "I know that life," said Ravsese, slowly drifting away. "Yet I was not free. You are a good, wholesome spirit. I wish that others saw you." The strange little woman drew a thin nettle from her hair and pricked the tip of her index finger. A thick black sphere of molasses, aged and enriched over hundreds of years, formed from the tiny wound, and gently she reached over the bed and drew her finger across Ravses's top and bottom lips. Ravses's sinuses filled with the musk of the dark sap, and when she licked her lips, she tasted a strong, earthy, healing sweetness. Then Orchid sang softly, "I am the morning rain that comes at dawn before the sun fills the hot summer sky, dews the leaves, and calls the mist that rises. I am the freshly tilled earth that nurtures seeds that bear the colourful flowers for bees and bugs of many shapes and sizes. I am the sapling tree that grows from wet earth to rise into the sky and nourish the birds that arrive in many guises. I am the rich bounty from the farmer's hands, feeding the hungry and destitute in the village that no one realizes." As Ravsese closed her eyes and succumbed to her slumber, she whispered drearily, "You are many things. I'm the garden. Go to sleep now, child, said Orchid, and Ravsez fell into darkness. Ravsezi awoke to a cold wetness on her face. Squinting her eyes open, she saw snow coming in through the circular window above her. The sky overhead was flat grey. For the first time since she could remember, there were no dreams haunting her thoughts, as she slowly roused to full wakefulness. Her lips were sticky with a delicious syrupy sweetness, and her limbs were relaxed, limber, and free from pain. Her waking mind came together in an orderly fashion, like a perfectly organised puzzle where each missing piece had its obvious placement, quickly forming as a whole image of everything in complete clarity. She never felt this refreshed in her whole life. Another cold, damp gust came in from the window, blowing the curtains inward and bringing small flakes of snow that flecked her white hair and horns. Looking around, she found herself alone in her room. Swinging her legs out from the bed, she hopped down and went over to the cold, lifeless wood stove. Her bare feet made soft padding sounds on the cold floorboards. How long have I been asleep? She wondered. She bent down in her long sleep shirt and prodded at the cold, lifeless ashes to find any embers left to reinvigorate, but to no avail, signalling it had been more than a day since the wood stove had been lit. Sighing and shivering, she realised the fire had to be started all over. In this regard, she was thankful for her previous life's experiences in House Vecklischer, as she was quite good at getting a fire started quickly, especially in this expensive, efficient Mutton-made model. In short order, she had a roaring fire glowing in the wood stove in the corner of the room. Shutting the metal door and dusting off her hands, she quickly ran hot water into an iron pot from the tub, then peeled several oranges from the nearby breakfast plate, dropping the orange peels into the water. She set the pot onto the top of the wood stove, and within moments the room filled with a sweet citrus aroma that brought her even more clarity and purpose. After eating the oranges and drinking several mugs of cold water, she got dressed while humming to herself, this time choosing warmer clothes from the wardrobe. Dark maroon wool leggings with tan leather knee socks covered her legs, and a dark brown leather tunic lined with thick white wool and embroidered with crimson and violet floral designs, and laced sleeves covered her upper body. Thin, warm violet gloves with crimson palms lined with rabbit fur were pulled up to her elbows, and a matching crimson and violet leather hat lined with rabbit fur covered her head with flaps that hung down on either side, covering her ears. She couldn't believe the energy she felt. It was as if she had come out of a lifetime of terrible sickness that all at once fevered away through the night, leaving her feeling dry but rejuvenated in the morning, resetting her back to her basic levels of functioning, and ready to face her life again with renewed purpose and vigour. Distantly she wondered about Orchid, but felt safe that he was likely with Piecora. Then she thought about Piecora and smiled despite herself. She felt the movements and vibrations of the sovereignty beneath her feet as she sat down to pull on her wool socks and boots, but she cared not. Her mind was too active, too engaged, too motivated to care. It seemed that despair was something she was incapable of feeling even while trying to recall it. She just couldn't believe how this felt and wished she could somehow bottle it for later. She hopped back onto the bed and pushed her face through the circular portal into the cold, wet air and snow. The time of day was impossible to determine from the dark cloud cover. Distant lightning flickered over dark, rolling mountains on the horizon that were most certainly no longer the golden lawns of Artemis. She looked down, and for an instant a primordial fright gripped her that a moment later transformed into euphoric exhilaration as she saw the snow-covered landscape below passing quickly beneath the ship. Tops of old evergreens blanketed with snow scraped against the hull and canvas wings of the Sovereignty as it passed them by, knocking the snow from their peaks and blasting it into the air in turbulent clouds. From above and over the wind, she could hear the sounds of shipmates calling out to each other as they collectively drove the ship further eastward. "Where in all of the devils are we?" she thought to herself wondrously. She bounded off the bed back into the room filled with youthful excitement. She grabbed her hooded violet wool cloak lined with dark red fox fur and flung it around her, opened the door, and walked with zest in her steps toward the ship's common room. There she found it filled with people, both sailors and passengers alike. She had no intention of staying inside, as she wanted to confront her fears as soon as possible while her revitalization lasted. However, in the corner of her eye, she couldn't help but notice a familiar figure. The tall, muscular man with ebony skin and bald head from The Knife's Edge. The friend of Vinex's all that time ago when she first met Piecora. The Knife's Edge. I remembered the name. She laughed inwardly as she crossed the room, revelling in her mind working properly again. Several people took notice of her and a few even pointed, but nobody held her back or disrupted her walk. Holding her breath, Ravses forged onward until she was outside on the foredeck in front of the main mast, where she had her seizure. She immediately crossed the deck and went right to the side and leaned on the railing, lifting her face and throwing her hood back to feel the crisp, cold elements of the winter storm on her face. "Mumi," she heard distantly, and opening her eyes, she saw Orchid halfway up the main mast tethered by a rope. He waved at her emphatically, and her heart leaped in fear. Before she could call out to him, a deep voice said next to her, "Your boy's quite a shipmate. He can get up and down faster than any of my crew. Might hire him when we get back if I can wait that long." She looked over and saw Ogium walking toward her from the gigantic ship wheel, currently in the grips of the mangy, sleeveless man with wild hair and tattoos. "Loves being up there, loves to act like he's flying," he said. Ravses stifled her fear as she watched her son dexterously scale the mast up and down like a monkey. She shook her head and said wondrously, "I'd have never known he had that in him. Until all this." She waved her hand, capturing the entire ship in her gesture. "Looks like old Orchid took good care of you," said Ogium. "Like she brought you back from the grave. Life's back in your eyes and colours in your face, and not just from cold." "She did indeed," Ravses said, turning to stare back out at the landscape moving by. More lightning flickered in the distance, glinting off snow-capped peaks of tall, jagged mountains. "Somewhere down inside me the fear remains. I can feel it, but I feel removed from it. Your ship's healer works wonders. Do you know what she is?" Ogium jested. "Just a druid, but we love her anyway." Then he pointed to the mountains and said, "We're doing what we can to get around that rise, but they're racing ahead of us. These wild lands, hard to believe the stories until you're in them. It's like they respond to us and our navigation. Hard to believe. Feels like we're a plaything for some divine childish god. Piecora says we cannot fight it, that the only way through is to adapt and play by its rules. The wild lands demand our respect, or it will feed on us, she says. I believe her, but I feel useless." "I know what you mean," Ravsese responded. "What happens if we can't get around the mountains?" "Then we fly over," said Ogium. "What? How?" asked Ravsese worriedly. "The sovereignty has more tricks in her than we've seen yet," said Ogium. "She was built to handle any situation, including mountains. We'll get past them one way or another." After a long moment, she asked, "So, this is it then? The wildlands. We're out of Canonia." "About 3 days out, milady." "Aye, we're in the wildlands now," said Ogium. "Quite something to behold. Something different every morning. We're all still getting used to it. Doesn't help that the red moon's leaving us at night and no sign of the white moon. Crew thinks the green moon will soon make an appearance, could be tonight or tomorrow. Bad omens then, that's if you're superstitious." Ravsese looked back at the 3 main sails, each with the black coiled dragon of Eindonjevangshan. Above the masts flickered the banners of the Callistico's harp and wave device. Along the side, She saw the 6 canvas wings, with the same black-coiled dragon insignia topped with pennants bearing the Callistico device. It made Ravsés wonder about who really owned the ship, and who was in control. Would Eindon really step away once House Callistico reformed? Would it come to a rivalry between him and Valesh? Seeing his device all over the ship made her doubt that he would be willing to let go of this prize willingly, or any others that might come after. Too much money in it for him. But then again, who could guess the ambitions of an ancient dragon of steel, especially one who's lived among humans for as long as he has? She lifted her hand from the cold, icy railing and felt a tar-like, sticky substance clinging between her glove and the railing. Looking down at her palm, she beheld a clear, thick, oily phlegm that smelled noxious, burning her sinuses when she held it close. Her eyes went wide when the realization hit her, and without speaking she showed her hand to Ogiom. "Eh, the wildlands," he said. "We've seen strange creatures all about since leaving Cannonia. Something must have flown overhead. Sorry, milady, we'll have your glove washed if you like." "'Tis not the wildlands," she replied with wide, terrified eyes. Her brief, luxurious moment of confidence and tranquility shattered as her deeply buried fears raced back to the surface, undoing all of Orchid's gentle work. Later that night inside Ogiom's captain's quarters, Ravsese, Piecora and Ogiom sat around a small table lit by a single oil lamp. Both Piecora and Ravsese had just relayed their story about the changeling assassin attack in Rultin's sagery in Coast Haven. Ogiom had a dour look in his face as he stared into the flickering light of the lamp. "Rultin cut it with his knife, and that's how it was exposed," said Piecora. "Otherwise we would have probably died that night. It carried a preloaded weapon filled with poison, ready to launch as soon as it pointed it at its victim. These things are created with one singular purpose: to mimic and blend with people and kill its target." "Who is that, then?" asked Ogiom quietly. "And why? Why would Kelganost send such a beast to Coast Haven and try to kill the bookkeeper, and then plant one here on the sovereignty among us?" "I don't know," said Piecora. "Has Eindon ever shared with you the goal of the sovereignty?" asked Ravsese. "Well, several-fold," he said. "First, to prove it can be done, sail across the wild lands and return safely. Second, involves Ediotor in some way. We're to stop in Keodanath, the town near there, and send a research team into the ruin. Lastly, we're to come back to Cannonia with whatever we found and bring it to Eindon." Ravsese briefly thought about how thorough Orchid's work was, for despite being filled with all of her familiar fears again, they were assimilated by the luscious high that Orchid made for her, leaving Ravsese nearly trembling with exasperation and anger. She was just so sick of all this running and being afraid all the time that she no longer wanted to be enslaved by it. She wanted to fully own and manage everything that she felt and not be debilitated by it, and something Orchid put in her helped her with this. Still, she noticed that she always fidgeted with the ring and wondered if wearing such a hell-wrought weapon somehow contributed to Orchid's mind-healing work, perhaps even amplifying it. She looked at Piecora and said directly, "Something wants to sabotage this voyage. It tried to stop it before it even launched. They came after Rultin thinking he was involved. Maybe because Eindon purchased Serpendis's mansion that the tapestry turned into a museum and safe house with Callistico money. Poor Rultin. I hope he's all right. Something in Kelganost is connected with Ediotor, and it knows about the sovereignty." "I marvel at how your mind works," said Piecora with her head cocked to the side. Ravsese didn't know if Piecora was being sarcastic or not. She responded, "It's just a thought. Why else would a changeling be on this ship?" "Ogiom, I think you should be accompanied at all times and post guards at your door at night," said Piecora, confirming that she believed in Ravsese's hypothesis. "I can't be here. My commitment is with Ravsese and her son, but you needed to be guarded." I'll do that," he responded reluctantly. Also, I'm going to go through my crew tomorrow, one by one, and give them the knife test. If it's none of my crew, then it's a passenger." "Or the captain," Ravsese blurted unexpectedly. She whipped her hands up to her mouth, as if she just inadvertently insulted both of them. A long moment of awkward silence filled the room, before Ogiom held his hand to the middle of the table and said, "Yes, you're right. Test me first, but then we do the same for each of you. We start here in this room and work our way outward." Piecora took out her knife and quickly dragged the edge over his palm. Ogiom winced as dark, hot blood seeped from the wound and down the side of his hand. He quickly withdrew it and wrapped it in a cloth. He was not a changeling. Neither Piecora nor Ravsese proved to be changelings either, but this brought little ease to their minds. "Hate to say this, but you should also test your boy tonight," said Ogiom. "I will," Ravsese replied. When Ravsese and Piecora returned to their room, they found Auertor sleeping in the middle of the bed between the two pillows, as if waiting for them. Ravsese sat down on the bed and pricked his foot with a small sewing needle, and sighed with relief when she saw a dark dot of blood appear in the lamplight that Piecora held close. Over the course of the following day, all of the crew had tested negative to what Ogiom had come to name the bookkeeper's knife test. The only other person that Ogiom shared the truth with was his boatswain, Sifa Penrose, and he instructed her to spread the false tale that a strange sickness had fallen onto the ship from the wildlands, and everyone must be blood tested. In this way, all of the passengers of the Sovereignty were then tested that night, and not a single one had tested positive from the bookkeeper's knife test as having the sickness. Sifa dutifully made herself available to everyone on the ship to answer questions and quell any concerns, never mentioning anything about the real threat that remained undiscovered. Once again, later that night, Ogiom, Piecora and Ravsese gathered in his quarters, this time also joined by Sifa. Without her hat and rugged sea coat, Ravsese was struck by Sifa's weathered beauty and commanding posture. No wonder she's second in charge, thought Ravsese. If something happened to Ogiom, she could probably run this ship, and no one would notice. "Everyone was tested, and no one came up as the villain captain," Sifa said flatly. "Where does that leave us?" "Are you certain this is what we're dealing with?" asked Ogiom. "We're in strange lands now. All sorts of things watch us from below and visit us from the sky, things we've never seen before. What if your hand just found some droppings?" "Nothing smells like a changeling," said Ravsese, "and once you've smelled it, it never leaves you. Nothing produces this stuff naturally. It is sorcerous and evil. It burns your senses, and its smoke is poisonous." "And I'm her witness," said Piecora. "I saw the stuff on the railing. I smelled it, and it is the same stuff as what attacked us in Rultins. Trust us, please. If we didn't find anyone being mimicked today, it means it wasn't discovered yet." "Which means only one of two things," said Sifa. "Either it isn't mimicking anyone and it's just hiding somewhere on the ship, or it is mimicking someone and we timed our testing poorly. Somehow it was cunning enough to elude us by making sure its shape wasn't coinciding with its counterpart in the same room, thereby avoiding our notice. If this is a trained assassin from Kelganost, that's where I'd put my wager. It's possible that it watched us while we tested people, shifting into new shapes as they came and went. Which means we need to get everyone together at the same time, all at once, and retest everyone," said Ogiom. "Which, I'm afraid, will cause undue alarm," said Sifa. "See out the window, low on the horizon. The sickle of the green moon rises, watching us from just over the mountains. By now the crew has already seen it. Already people are concerned about this sickness story that we spread. I was hoping to be able to put this behind us and remedy things." Ogiom ran his hands through his dark hair in frustration. He kicked at a stool angrily, and it tumbled across the floor and banged against the opposite wall. "Of course, this had to be harder than this voyage already is," he muttered to himself with disdain. Of course, this had to happen to me. Ravsesi realized she never wanted to see Ogiom angry, and she recalled what Piecora said about disciples of Bear, one of the 6 Xianjian animal spirits, or totems. Several moments of uncomfortable quiet lingered over the room as the stool came to rest. Finally, Ravsesi said, "Well, maybe we can do it in such a way as to not raise alarm then." She stood up and paced the room. "We know what we must do in order to deal with this thing. Get everyone together and test them again at the same time so the creature cannot hide among them. But at the same time, we should have a party go down and explore the ships below decks, all the way to the bottom, into the bilge. Thus, if we don't find it among the crew or passengers, then we know where it's hiding. Do you have anyone that can do this? Anyone who can fight when this thing is cornered?" "Aye, I do," Ogiom said. "Sifa, you should bring Cleese into this. Have him hand-pick 5 others who can go down with him and deal with this thing." Ravsesi knew that Ogiom meant the crew's master-at-arms, Cleisthenes Gloria Forti, who was rumoured to be in a relationship with Sifa Penrose while at sea, despite being married with 2 young children at his home in Enigrad. "Aye, Captain," said Sifa. "With your consent, I should also acquire Wilhelmina to lead them. She knows the ship inside and out." Wilhelmina Weisskrammer was the name mentioned by Eindon when they first arrived. The woman with the Muthan name who seemed to be central in the building and engineering of the ship. Ravsesi hadn't met her, and didn't know that she came aboard and joined the expedition. "Yes, get Willie in and tell her the truth as well so that both she and Cleese know what's really happening. But tell them not to utter a word to anyone else without asking me first." "Then how do we get everyone together without frightening them while this search mission takes place?" asked Piecora. Ogiom replied, "We'll need to get everyone top deck. As for putting them at ease, we can say there's a rat infestation." Again, Ravsesi found herself feeling highly justified in her opinion that Ogiom was not made for public relations. Everyone sat in quiet thought for a long time, before a quiet knock came to the door. Piecora opened it, and Ogiom's helmsman entered the room. Ravsesi recognized him as the sleeveless one with the tattoos and wild hair. Now that he faced her, she saw glints of lamplight from his sharpened gold teeth accentuating his scarred face. "Jion Jabbar? What is it, lad?" asked Ogiom. Ravsesi realized with surprise that the phrase Ogiom shouted when they first launched was actually the helmsman's name. Maybe they also used it as a sailor's cry. "Cap'n, them mountains going to be right in front of us in the morning," Jion said nervously. "We can't outrun them, and Viridra Luna's come out." Ravsesi realized the man was Xianjian by his thick accent and his naming. Despite this, he used the Canonian name for the green moon, Viridra Luna, another overlap between Xianjians and Canonians among Ogiom's crew. Ogiom let out a long sigh. "I know the green moon is out, Jion. Try not to work yourself up. Slow us down to half speed through the night, Jion. Lower us to the ground and drop the blade when we reach the foothills. In the morning, we'll make ready for flight." "Cap'n," said Jion hesitantly, "them mountains, they're high mountains, blot out the sky, no stars in the east, like a wall. And Viridra Luna watches us from over them, just a sliver, but she's there, like looking at us sideways." "I know, Jion," said Ogiom. "Nevertheless, we'll go over. It's either that, or turn back around, which isn't an option. No mountains are cutting off the Sovereignty's passage to Keodaneth. She's built for this." "Aye, Captain," said Jion, and then he left. "Captain, we can use this," said Sifa when the door shut behind Jion. "If we are to fly the ship above the mountains, we'll have the creature isolated with us. Get everyone together top deck and test them again with the knife, while sending a small party below. There's nowhere for the assassin to go once we're flying over the mountains. Whether it's hiding among us or hiding below, we'll find it." Ogiom snapped his fingers loudly, startling Ravsesi. That's it, he said suddenly. Tomorrow at dawn, we'll cover the top deck with canvas and heat it from below from the wood stoves. Leave all the doors open. Make everyone go top deck while we're over the mountains. Food stores, Captain, said Sifa. We can say a bug got into the food stores, and we need to drop the bad food from the hull hatch while flying over the mountains, and it's best for everyone to be on top and tested one last time. That will also explain why a small party is going below decks. By the time we land on the other side of the mountains, we should have this whole issue resolved, and I can start cleaning up this mess. If we take a day settled and anchored after landing, we can send a hunting party out for more food. What about Orchid? Asked Ravzizi. Ship's healer might see through this charade. No doubt she will, said Ogium. Wait, what happened when you tested her? Asked Ravzizi, recalling when Orchid pricked her own finger and bled the sap that she applied to Ravzizi's lips. I didn't, said Ogium, but then regretted his hasty reply. What? Why not? Asked Sifa with surprise. Ogium stared at Sifa and sighed. How long have you known Orchid, lass? As long as we've been a crew together, Captain, Sifa replied. Yes, so you know she's different than the rest of us, yes? Said Ogium. I never really thought of it other than that she's a healer, a skilled herbalist, and never seems to bathe. What do you know of druids? Asked Ogium. What? Druids? Please, said Sifa incredulously. Crazy cultists who live in the woods and eat their own, or crawl underground covered in fungus living among the mushrooms. Savage priests who dabble in mind-altering concoctions, capturing people and making them see ridiculous visions, converting them into their wicked covens and false gods. I could go on. You say Orchid's a druid? Oh, that fits perfectly. I never trusted her anyway. Forget I said anything. She's not a druid, said Ogium, rolling his eyes and holding his head in his hands. We still need to test her, said Sifa. I will test her tonight, said Ogium, but Ravzizi knew he was lying because clearly he knew what Orchid really was. It was fascinating to see how he dealt with Sifa, who was so entrenched in her own Canonian ignorance that he couldn't bother to continue with it. She couldn't be swayed, so he lied to end the conversation, which was a very Unzenyan thing to do based on her experience with Piecora. This was perhaps another Canonian trait that separated Ogium from his own kin and blood. He was able to deceive as easily and conveniently as he could speak. She looked over at Piecora, but she just watched the conversation silently with her arms folded. Anyway, Sifa, sell it as entertainment, a feature of the sovereignty. Sing songs, tell the musicians to bring their instruments, laughed Ogium. There it is, Sifa. That is the plan. See, these mountains are helping us. I had a feeling they would outrun us, and here we are. And now that we'll be flying over them, there will be no chance for this thing to leave the ship. The timing is perfect. It'll be trapped here with us. No escape. Indeed, said Piecora solemnly. No escape. Thank you for listening to this chapter from the Book of Urm. If you enjoyed this reading, like and subscribe to our channel, and consider supporting us at the Book of Urm at patreon.com.